here we are.
Hello.
How's everyone doing today? Great. Well, thanks so much for coming out on a Monday evening. I had to check what day of the week it was. And so grateful to everyone who's joining from afar as well. But Sara, Celia, I'm just incredibly excited for this conversation we're about to have. You are both incredibly talented artists. You have talents I could only dream of having. In fact, I did dream actually of being a singer earlier in life. And I used to train actually with my sister formally. And then when I hit adolescence and my voice changed, I got really embarrassed about that, and I stopped singing, and I still regret that to this day. But now I just consume and appreciate music, and so I'm just really grateful for the chance to be here with both of you. Today we're here to talk about the messiness of life, and it feels particularly messy right now. Yeah, there's so much happening in the world, but there's also a lot happening in people's lives and in their communities. And I hear about this a lot as Surgeon General as I travel around the country and people talk to me about their worries about their children, their worries about their aging parents, they worry about the future and the uncertainty of it. And all of this can take a toll on our mental health and well-being. And we're going to talk a little bit today about how we manage that. How can we deal with that? And I think it's so appropriate that we have both of you here because you're both such good friends. And we know that friendship is one of the keys actually to supporting our mental health and well-being. So I'd like to actually start there by asking both of you, how did you meet and become such good friends?
Oh my God, I love this question. This is a great start. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and I think what's significant about our coming together is that we met just like 6 or 7 years ago, and I think both of us had pretty robust friend groups and deep friendships already and weren't necessarily looking to bring a lot of new people into the fold. And I think what became clear is that we met each other at a time when some of the things that I've heard you talk about in terms of asking for help, being vulnerable, that because of what age we were, our capacity to share in a different way than I maybe had with friends that I met in college felt very, very different. And so even though we were sort of new friends, I think the depth of our friendship was very different from ones that I had from friends I had made earlier in my life.
Yeah, middle-aged ladies don't play.
Oh.
You know what I mean? We are here for realness. I want authenticity. I want humor. But I think to your point, I think you also know more about yourself as we grow. I really love, there are things I don't like about aging, but one of the things I love about aging is this deeper sense of wisdom and a sort of knowing of yourself, and more so all the things about yourself that you don't know. This sort of comfortability that's growing in the sense that I might not know myself as well as I thought I did, which leaves all of this possibility to try things a different way. And I think, with our friendship, we got to, it was also the height of the pandemic when we started spending more time together. And what an amazing clarifier that experience was. It just, you cut the bullshit. Can I say bullshit?
I think we all know what it means, so yeah.
You just cut through so much because there just isn't there's no time for it. There's no space for it. It's just too important to find what feels true and real. And deep admirer of you as a person, how you move through the world as a friend, but as a mother and a partner. And feels like I've learned as an activist, as an artist, I just look to you and look up to you in so many ways. And what a cool thing to say about your friend. Just she's awesome, you guys.
But it also, hearing you say that about connecting over COVID, that I do think as painful, we were at sort of personal lows during that time. We were both struggling mightily and with different problems, with loneliness, with isolation, with the unknown. But that somehow inside of that, there also was this opportunity for connection that did, I think, go deeper immediately because we were so hungry for it. And that I think it's so hard sometimes when we're at a major low to feel why would anyone want to have a part of me right now. Like when we are feeling our worst, the idea that you could actually connect with someone. And I think, well, the gift of COVID was that we were all experiencing it together, and that sometimes when we personally are really struggling, it feels much harder to reach out to someone and be as vulnerable, but that because there was like a level playing field of us all feeling so bad, that we really, it also felt like this massive opportunity.
I mean, this is incredible, first of all, that you became friends in that way, because I have heard from so many people, including my own friends and people I meet on the road, about how hard it is to actually make new friends after college, after your 20s. And I think there are a lot of adults who are really struggling with this, who do feel really alone. In fact, we know there are a lot. The Surgeon General's advisory we issued last year, in fact, talked about that 1 in 2 adults are actually living with measurable levels of loneliness, and among young people, the levels are higher. But how do you think people can go about making friends, in their 30s, in their 40s, in their 50s, when there aren't always common places to gather, when it may not be so easy to open up to one another? Like, what have you found in terms of helpful advice for folks, and maybe even for yourself as you think about continuing to have a healthy social life as you get older?
I think it has so much to do with one of my favorite topics, and it has so much to do with vulnerability and the willingness to be true and vulnerable with someone, even in the face of the fact that there might be rejection there. You might be wanting a connection with someone who doesn't reciprocate or isn't able to reciprocate in some way. But more often than not, I find that when you really ask someone to are they able to show up for you in a certain kind of way, I feel like people really want to rise to meet the occasion. It is so hard to ask for help, and I think certainly as women in the industry, I think we learn very early to be very self-sufficient and kind of independent, but oh my gosh, more than ever for me, I value my female friendships so much. But I think, any person, I think it has to do with how much you're willing to be vulnerable and how much you're willing to share yourself. Certainly going towards activities that bring you joy. I think you run a better chance of running into someone who also finds a spark of joy in the same place as you do. But in my 40s, I'm 44 now, I've made like several really close new friends, and it seems insane to say that because I wouldn't have guessed that to be the case.
I completely agree. And I think the ability early on in meeting someone when they say like, so how are you, or what are you up to, or like sharing something that isn't necessarily like a great thing, that vulnerability, it either you'll realize like this person is not interested in hearing about my sad day, or that person will say, I also ... And then there's a different version of connection. I'm like thinking about just a couple of months ago, I was getting ready to do a talk and I was having a very, very, very hard time. And I think even 5 years ago, I would have just been like, you got to get through it. That's what your identity is being a self-reliant and self-sufficient person. And I called Sarah and I was like, I'm having a hard day, and just sobbed on the phone. And on one hand, I was so embarrassed that was the way that I was reaching out. And also, I felt so much better after we got off the phone. And I hope she'll call me, like when she is in that state. And
I have.
And yeah.
I have.
But like, what a gift to feel like you have somebody who she didn't try to solve it, she just listened. And she did have really good advice, but she didn't immediately go to the solve. She just let me feel my feelings.
You're very good at that. You were talking about this, about talking to friends and the ones that know that it doesn't need a solve right away. Do you have those solvers that you avoid in those moments?
being a guy, like we're genetically predisposed to try to solve things even when it's profoundly unhelpful.
Is that true? Is there a genetic predisposition?
No. I was just speaking euphemistically. God, I got to be careful about what I say.
Just because people.
No, I do think, it may be cultural, who knows, like where it comes from. But I know in my own life, I've actually had to learn that. Because there was a long period in my life and I would do this with my wife too. I would think I was being helpful when she would bring up an issue. I'd be like, oh, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And at one point she just said, look, I don't need you to solve the problem. I just need to know that we're together on it and that we can talk about these things. And it was actually very helpful, like feedback for me. And because I realized I need to be that way in my friendships too. And because I do think sometimes that we judge ourselves in friendship and think maybe that we're not providing enough value to the other person, or maybe we're not smart enough, we're not solving enough for their problems, or we're not helpful enough, whatever it might be. But as we were saying, it's like this is scientifically true. There's data that shows that there's an asymmetry in how we perceive helpfulness, in a pairing. Like we might think, as a person who's showing up for someone, that we're not doing enough because we tend to underestimate how much value we bring to somebody else in a crisis. And they actually usually estimate the value to be much higher. So we walk around thinking, I don't know, I didn't really do enough for my friend. Meanwhile, they're thinking, wow, that was really nice. Sarah and Celia really showed up for me. Like that meant a lot to me. So I think that's important, to keep in mind. I'll just share with you one.
Mind-blowing to me. That's amazing.
Yeah, it is. And I do. The reason I actually think it's really important is I think there are a lot of people who could show up for their friends and don't. And they don't for a couple of reasons. One, because they're not sure how valuable it'll be. They're not confident they'll have enough of value to add. But the second is sometimes they're worried about invading the other person's privacy, being intrusive. And they often think, well, if the person needs me, then absolutely I'll come. But I'll wait for them to ask.
Yeah.
And I think we wait way too much. I think we should just show up. Like the worst thing can happen if you show up in someone's life in a time of crisis is they say, you know what, I'm good. I'd rather not talk. I don't want to deal with it right now. But even if they say that, to know that you were thinking of them, that you cared enough to actually call them or show up at their door, like that means so much to people. And I know this and we all know this, I think, from real life experience. But I remember a time when I was younger, when I was in college, like my family made this terrible discovery in the summer of 1996. We found out that somebody who we had regarded as a really close family friend for years turned out to actually be an international con artist. And he ended up, yeah, you didn't see that coming, did you? Turns out neither did we. But he fled the country that summer, and sadly for us, he actually fled the country with all of our life savings.
Oh my God.
And it was a heartbreaking time for us. And I was inspired to go into medicine by my parents. I was watching them practice medicine and take care of patients. But we found out in that process, where all our life savings were gone, that the office where my parents had seen patients all those years, where I was inspired to become a doctor, that had been taken too. And we found out we were about to be evicted from our own clinic. And so I remember us driving as fast as we could to that clinic, trying fighting to hold back tears the whole time. And when we showed up there, we were shocked to find that there was a small group of friends waiting with boxes and tape. And as we sat next to each other for the next hour and just packed up this lifetime of memories, they didn't judge us. There were no looks of scorn. There were no questions about, how could you be so silly and trust this guy? There was none of that. There was just this look on their faces of love and compassion that said, we've got your back. And that was almost 30 years ago, and I will never, ever forget the people who showed up. Now, they might think, oh, I could have packed more. Maybe I could have stayed for longer. But you know what? We don't think about any of that. What we remember is that in a moment of crisis, they showed up for us. And that's all that mattered.
Thank you for sharing that story. That's so... Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
About, I think, masculinity. And I think when I look around me, the female friendships that I see feel so much, I think culturally, both because I think women are conditioned to be caregivers and are also just in terms of showing up, in terms of maybe asking the harder questions. I think part of what just moved me so much about you sharing that is that I do think vulnerability in men is just not valued in our culture. And I'm curious if you have thoughts about how we help boys, but also, men. I guess I'm curious if there is a difference between the way that men might make friends in middle age and women make friends, and if you would maybe talk about your moai.
Yeah, I can talk about the moai. I think there very well may be differences. I think they probably are, and where they come from, hard to know. I think a lot of them are cultural, so it might be deeper than that. But I do think that even though it's interesting, even though the data says that men and women struggle with loneliness at similar rates, a lot of that is subjective data, right? So someone has to say on a survey that they're struggling with loneliness. And I actually think that men actually have a lot more shame around being lonely, and so I think they admit it less on surveys. That's just my own suspicion. So I think that the part of the model of masculinity that we have seen in modern society is this notion that to be a real man means you don't need other people, you're self-sufficient, you don't show emotions. And that's a bit counter to just how human beings function, right? Like all of us, men and women, are cerebral and emotional creatures, right? We all need other people, we're all interdependent. And there's actually no shame in that, but culturally I think we do make, starting from a young age, young boys feel like, hey, if I'm going to be a real man, that means I got to just become stoic and do everything on my own. And the only latitude that's typically given for sharing is potentially like with your spouse or your significant other. So I think that the way that changes is, honestly, I think it changes by modeling a different way of being. And I've seen, the good news is that we have a lot of incredible men in society who are showing up for each other, who are talking openly about feelings, and but talking about them in a way that's actually, I think, coming from a place of strength. Like it takes strength and courage to be real, to talk about what you're actually dealing with. And I just think that we have to change how we define strength, because I think that is part of the challenge we have. I have a 7-year-old son and a 6-year-old daughter. I don't want my son to grow up thinking that as a boy, like he can't be a real man if he expresses, affection or compassion toward, his other guy friends, and this is where our moai was really helpful. But what Celia's referring to is something that I ended up creating in 2018 with 2 other friends. And moai is an old Okinawan tradition where a small group of people come together and they make an explicit commitment to have each other's backs. And 2018 was a time where I was actually really struggling with loneliness. And it was after my first tenure as Surgeon General had ended, and I was just lost. I didn't know what to do, and I didn't have a community, and I had neglected family and friends during my time in office. And so I one day ran into these 2 friends, and they were the kind of friends where you see them, you're like, oh my God, I love these guys. Why don't we see each other more often? And you're like, oh, we should get together, and then you never do. It was like one of those types of friendships. So at the end of this time hanging out, I was just like, you know what? I just need to be open with them on what I'm going through. So I did, and I realized we were all feeling a bit lonely and lost. So we made a commitment on that day to build a moai together, and that meant for us practically that once a month we would video conference with each other, and we would actually talk about the stuff that mattered, what we loved and were excited about, but also what we were scared about and worried about. We talk about our relationships. We talk about stuff that friends don't always talk about or necessarily talk about, like their health, their finances. We talk about it all. And in between, whenever we had a major decision to make or a moment of joy or something bad that happened, we would call each other and we would have a call. That moai changed my life. It may help me make huge decisions about my health, my family, and my work. I was offered this very prestigious job at one point, and I almost took it, but I said, I need to talk to the moai about it. So my friends, Sunny and Dave, I said, what do you think about this? You know what they said to me? It was very interesting. This is why honesty and friendship is so important. They said, Vivek, you're saying all the right things, but we're not feeling it from you. it feels like you're trying to convince yourself that you're excited about this job. And what I realized is my insecurities were driving me to consider that job not a genuine sense of excitement. So I said no. And ultimately, my life changed because I said no. Incredible opportunities opened up, not just work-wise, but even the chance to be with my parents and my sister, with my wife and kids for 18 months, in Miami, Florida, which would never have happened had I taken that job. And those are memories that I will now savor for the rest of my life. So the bottom line is that I think as guys, we need to talk about friendship. We need to model especially for young boys, what it's like to have healthy friendships with other guys. And we've got to do that, because if we don't, what we are doing is consigning our boys and young men to lives of increasing loneliness and desperation, and that has profound impacts on their mental and physical health.
I love that.
Yeah.
Are there 3 people in the Moai?
Yeah, there are 3 of us. Yeah.
Is there a certain number that has to?
There's no requirement as far as
So
for a
interesting. I didn't
specific
know that
number,
about-
but you could do it with 3, you can do it with 5, you can do it with 6, whatever number feels right to you. But everyone has to be coming from the same place in the
Yeah.
sense that they have to be on the same page about the commitment to have each other's backs and to be open and honest. Yeah, but it is incredibly, incredibly liberating. So
I do love that those moments in friendship where someone is really seeing you and
Yeah.
is able to say, like, I know what you think this is, but let me just mirror a little bit what I think this is.
Yeah.
And you could have still just made the decision. You could have still made any decision you
Yeah.
wanted. But it's so valuable. But it does take time to sort of build that trust and investment and intentionality around, okay, I'm going to really show you who I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Mhm.
and you're going to make a commitment to stay, which is so beautiful. It's so noble to do that for each other. You know what I mean? Like we get this like brief moment here on earth. And I really, as a spiritual person, I really believe that God to me lives amongst people. That's our soul
that's
work.
beautiful.
Like that's where God is, and in creation of art but the taking care of each other through all of that. That's to me like the work of being on earth, because we're here just a little itty bitty time, just a tiny little bit of time.
I love how you described it, Sarah. Sarah and I were talking backstage about the notion of productivity and how we define productivity so narrowly in purely economic terms, and that leads us to think that spending our time on non-economic things like friendship is somehow less worthy or valuable. But what you're talking about, which I love, is the idea that our social and spiritual health are just as important as our physical health or economic health. They're places that are worthy of investing time and energy and effort. And that's one of the things I was actually curious to ask you about as well, both of you, is recognizing that friendship is an investment of time and energy. How do you create this space, like in your lives, for friendship and for people in a world that's constantly telling you to work more and to be more, quote unquote, productive?
Scheduling. I do think you just make a choice. You make a choice to place real value on the time spent with the people that fill your cup. You have to. We just had a run-in with a friend who the cup is empty. You can see the cup is empty. And there's this kind of frenzied, urgent need to keep, but if I just keep going, I can sort of see the clearing, but you're like, no, you're already in the place that's no good. You're already there, and the fact that you're trying to talk yourself into, if I can just get to that, I think the more we can kind of touch in on that state of mind earlier and earlier, and it is true that an hour long, a 15-minute, 5-minute conversation with someone who really knows you and loves you can be like a game changer. And it's just not really that much time. The investment in relationship, I think, actually is not about quantity, but more about quality. And so if you can be really intentional about inviting people into those deeper spaces, it's not that you need, a full weekend, though I would love one. But sometimes you have an hour, or you have 20 minutes for a phone call. Remember phone calls? Insane. But it's when Renee Elise Goldsberry is a very, very close friend of, yeah, clap for her. She's not even here. But, she, you know why I love her? Because she fucking calls. She calls and she's like, I know this is so 1993 of me, but I'm just like, she calls and I love sort of the idiosyncrasy of that, of just how strange and wonderful it is to actually just speak to your friend once in a while. It's not all the time, but I do think it's a choice. You decide to make it more important in your life, and I swear you will see and reap the benefits of that. It is a better life. It is a better life with people, close and beloved people in it.
We're big on a voice note. Like I feel like that's one of the ways that the difference of just texting and saying like, I'm thinking about you, and saying like, I'm walking down the street and there's a Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, it's the most boring thing, but usually we get to something that's like, and I'm feeling...
It's never that banal. It's usually like, hi, so I'm having a lot of anxiety around the... It's like, we get right to it.
We do. But I think just hearing one another's voice is such a difference than getting a text. And if we don't have the time for an actual phone call, that like, I really believe in the power of the voice note.
Agreed.
And I think I've started to realize that the times when I feel the most like I don't really have time to make room for friendships, or that I feel really overwhelmed, are usually the exact time that I need to think about taking myself out of isolation and into connection. That I think when as productivity starts to add up, it's so much more natural, I think, to go into isolation. And that over the years, I've started to realize, like, when I start to feel that is exactly the time, even if I don't have anything to say except that I feel very, very busy. And then usually I'm like, I'm too busy, I'm so stressed out or whatever. But just sharing that, I think, is when, in the past, I was always just like, nose to the grindstone, get it done.
I think it's medicine. I really do. I think it's medicine, and I think it's not frivolous to care for your well-being, spiritually and emotionally. It is essential. I mean, we're looking at so many different kinds of epidemics right now, but I certainly relate to the mental health and loneliness and pain. It's distortion of reality, and it breeds these kinds of actions that are inflammatory and rage-filled. And it's because, I mean, it's one of the many reasons, though, is because people feel they don't belong anywhere. There's no connection. There's no deep, true connection, and I don't mean online. And online is wonderful for many reasons, but it is not a surrogate for real relationship with human beings. We were talking about this, like in the grand scheme of evolution, we're still really young. Like we're still animals, and we need each other's animal beings in our spaces. We need to share breath. We need to share conversation. That's why music is so powerful. But I just think that, yeah, the more ways we can, it will help solve some of what is sick. It's medicine.
It is, and I don't think it's an overstatement to say
The
that
Surgeon
human
General
connection
said
is
it.
medicine. Yeah.
You have to believe it.
I'm right, you guys.
Put it here. There you go. Joint health declaration right here. But social connection
Can I get a
is
sticker
medicine.
on something, please?
Well, there are these Surgeon General's warnings, but I've been thinking for a while, we need a label that's Surgeon General approved, or endorsed or recommended. And
Surgeon General approved.
friendship would be right in the center of that. So, look, there's actually a lot of wisdom in what you just said about the power of voice. the power of seeing someone. I also love what you were saying about time, about how it's not about how much time you're spending. It's sometimes even just a quick phone call. It can make a big difference. Like for everyone who's listening, today, I want you to just think of the last time you called somebody spontaneously on the phone and they actually picked up. And think about how good that felt to hear their voice on the other end of the line. And think about how different it may have felt if they had just let it go to voicemail and then just texted you later just to say, hey, can't talk now. It's just very different to like hear the voice. And I wanted to ask you, you mentioned technology as well and online relationships versus offline relationships. I think this has been a struggle for so many people. I think it is an easier pathway to have online interactions. It seems like it's lower energy, to actually, in terms of activation energy, it seems like it's easier, more convenient. But it does feel like there's a real difference. How do you both manage the online world of social media and online interactions with the in-person, offline world of real-world friendships? How do you balance those?
We've had lots of conversations around this, actually, both being, public people as well. It's an interesting, it feels like a necessary space to engage with because of our jobs. Well, I won't speak for you. It feels like a necessary space to engage with because of my job, but I'm not like confused about whether or not it feels healthy. It doesn't feel healthy. It's not. I laugh at dog videos. That's my favorite thing about being online. I like getting little snippets of what my friends are up to, but in general, it is for me, a very low vibration. It's just, I can't help but sort of slip into some sort of mindless scrolling, and it goes into some kind of self-talk that is negative about what I'm not doing, the ways I'm not engaging in the world, the other things I wasn't at that festival, I didn't do, should I be posting? I just start going into this comparison place. And it's diminishing of my quality of life. So I generally I've made a choice not to engage obligatorily. I engage when I want to, and then at night, and then in the morning, and then all day. But other than that, it's really healthy. I have it under control. I mean, am I right? It's so addictive. Yeah. Does anybody not use is anybody not on social media in here? Who? Three?
I think what's interesting is I feel like there are so many conversations now.
Those are the happy people.
These are the wise ones.
They have sunshine coming out of their heads. But the number of people I know that are like, I'm not planning on sticking around on this platform. I have a plan to get off, which is how I feel. But I'm like, when? And so I guess I'm curious, for myself, what would it look like? What could I imagine it looking like to not have that? And it feels, I feel like what we're saying, we're joking, but we are addicted. And so it's like, what replaces that? Or what is it doing that is making it so hard to, it's easy to have the conversation about, I'm looking forward to the time when I'm not on it, but I don't know exactly how that happens. And I feel like one of the ways that I really want our Congress to work hard is to really talk about the impacts on our brains of what is happening, particularly for young people. But I'm like, if I'm in it as a middle-aged lady and I can't put it down, what about, young people who have come up with it, from the time they were 13 or, in some cases younger, that it just feels very difficult to imagine what it's like. I don't think we're delusional about whether or not it creates connection, because it doesn't. I feel like it doesn't. But it does do something else. And that thing feels hard to put down. And I'm just curious how we off-ramp ourselves. And it feels actually like something to me that needs to be collective. That it's like if we all go off of it, then we don't have to worry about it as much of what we're missing. But
it's so confusing because, as you're saying, and I agree with you that it's not a connective place, and yet there are times where I've shared something very vulnerable. I shared online when I went on my antidepressant very publicly, and I felt so connected because people started writing in, and then I realized, oh, I'm so not alone in this, but I was really fearful about making that post. And I've shared online about my feelings around aging or my own issues with my self-image and body dysmorphia and some of those things. And those, like sharing a pain point online can sometimes feel very connective, but I wonder if it's actually not. You know what I mean? Like I'm also getting just like, wow, so many people wrote me, instead of like, do I feel understood, or do I just love seeing a couple thousand comments roll in?
I think both of your instincts are in the right places, and I suspect that you're not alone, that there are millions of people out there who are wondering the same exact things. And what's interesting to me is actually, I don't think we talk enough about our struggles with technology and with social media in particular with each other. And so there's this illusion that's created that everyone else is managing it. They found that elusive balance. They figured it out. And we're the only ones who are up at like 2 a.m. going through our feed, even though we were supposed to go to bed 3 hours ago. But that is so many people. And it's not because something happened in the ether and just, took our self-controlled genes and made them defective. That is not what happened. What happened is the environment changed, that the platforms are designed to maximize how much time we spend on them. So it's not a bug, it's a feature of the platforms. And I think you're right, Celia, to worry about children, because if it's this hard for so many of us as adults, what we know about adolescents is that they're in a unique phase of brain development where their ability to control impulses is lower and where they're more susceptible to social comparison and to social suggestion. If you take a 13-year-old and you tell them, you know what, yes, all these things are happening in your life. We all remember how hard 13 was. But by the way, take this new technology that's designed by some of the best product engineers in the world who are armed with some of the best information about psychology and neuroscience and funded by some of the most well-resourced companies in the world, and good luck managing it. That's essentially what we've done. And that's the definition of an unfair fight. And it's one of the reasons why last year, actually, I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on social media and youth mental health to call on Congress in particular to put in place safety measures that would help us to protect kids from many of the harmful features that lead to so many of the harms that we've been talking about today, but which have now just entirely fallen on the shoulders of kids and parents. Lastly, I'll just say this. I think what you said also, which is really important, Celia, is you said that this is a collective action problem, which is absolutely true. Whether you're trying to start a gym routine or whether you're trying to go on a new diet or change your social media practices, all of that is much harder when you're doing it alone versus when you're doing it with somebody. So if you and Sara, and this is, I'm not saying you should do this, but I'm saying, hey, what if you did? If the two of you...
But you're not saying.
But I'm not saying. Sara and Celia, if you left here tonight and said, you know what, we've both been worried about how we're using technology, so we're going to commit to doing something different, and we're going to hold each other accountable to it. It could be something like it could be like once a week, we're actually not going to use social media if we use it daily. Or if you're using it a couple times a week, but it's still making you not feel so great, you might say, well, we're going to go on a 2-week break. And we're going to do that together. And we're going to check in every day just to see how we're feeling.
How are we going to check in?
So this is a great question. So you can call each other, right?
Phones on limits.
To quote some advice from a wise woman named Sara Bareilles from about 10 minutes ago, you could call each other. But this, I'm telling you this in part because, one, I've learned from college students I've been doing this college tour on loneliness and isolation recently, and they are struggling with the impacts of social media. And whenever I ask them, who's found that balance that you keep talking about? They're like, nobody. We don't know of anyone. But some of them have taken breaks, and they've done that with friends. And they found, whenever I ask them, like, well, how did you feel? This is what they always say very consistently. First few days, feel jittery, because I'm so used to checking all the time. Yeah. But then if I wait for a few days, it tends to go away and I settle out. And then I find, one, that I know less about everything that's happening around me, but I feel like I'm kind of starting to live life on my own terms, not based on what other people are telling me I should do or what they think is like, success. And they also say that the circle of people they interact with tends to be smaller, but it's more fulfilling, right? And so we have somehow, in the age of social media, shifted from quality of relationships being important to focusing on quantity of relationships. But the thousands or millions of followers you have on social media aren't necessarily the ones who are showing up for you in a crisis, or the people you can call and just be real with. Those are the kind of relationships that we need in our lives. So,
amen. I love that. Yes.
One of the things that I've loved is this conversation was supposed to be about mental health, and it has been about mental health. But you both just jumped in right away, talking about moments of anxiety where you called each other and helped each other out. You talked about antidepressants and how you shared more broadly with folks online about starting on antidepressants. What I am so interested in knowing about is, at a time where we're still struggling with so much stigma around mental health, where did you both find the courage and clarity to be able to speak so openly and thoughtfully about your mental health?
I think it really helps when you're an artist to feel like your capacity to share things that are not necessarily painting you in a version of yourself that you would like the most. I mean, I think that is part of it, that there is something sort of baked in to what we do that feels like it's just closer to the surface. And I think so much of what I appreciate about getting to be an actor, getting to be an artist, is that I am constantly self-evaluating what's going on inside. Like if I'm going on stage 8 times a week, like there's a lot that I'm coming, that's getting like mixed up in there. And so I think sometimes I'll do a show where I'm like, God, I just really felt so sad. And like, what is happening? And most people don't have jobs that are asking them to really look at the interiority of what emotions they are carrying around every day. And I just think what a gift to be able to be a part of a profession where I'm asked to do that, but then also where the people in the audience then hopefully, I'm doing a play right now where the woman who wrote it as a ritual to forgive her mother. And inside of me playing the character I'm playing the playwright, basically, I have started to think so much about my relationship with my mother. And then I've heard so many people who have watched the play say, I couldn't stop thinking about my mother and wanting to call her. And I was like, that thing that happens is such a gift and is a way to, I think about mental health in a sort of creative space or in an artistic space that's a little bit different than therapy or the ways that I usually think about it. But that I do think my relationship with mental health has been so impacted by the work that I get to do as an artist.
That's beautiful.
I love that. I think that's so true. We take that for granted sometimes, that we get to swim in spaces where it's like a part of the valued currency, that you sort of know what's going on inside. I think for me, I grew up with so much melancholy. I've just always had a really close relationship with sadness. It's just right there. So it's always right. I can always just cry. I can always cry. And I sort of muscled my way through most of my college years being someone who really felt the sadness of the world and of people around me so deeply. And then I kind of muscled my way through, and then I had a full-on just like meltdown. And I started disassociating, and I was scared. I was developing schizophrenia, and I was like, I don't know what's going on with me. I tried to explain it to my mom. She did not know what I was talking about. And I got into therapy for the first time. And I think for me, understanding that I was not alone in these sort of more terrifying spaces of my own mind, that there were lots of people who had to seek help and needed resources to be able to cope, was so miraculous to me that there was relief to be found, that I wanted to literally shout it from the mountaintops. And I don't really have a poker face. I'm not great at, I've never been a good liar. I just am too nervous about it. I grew up Catholic, and it's not a good thing to lie. And I just don't have another gear. I'm just not playing poker with anybody. And I shouldn't play poker anyway. I'm not very good at it. But it just felt so good to be truthful. And I found that the connections that grew out of that were so much richer and more valuable. The times I was willing to go to my most painful places in my music, those were the songs, like Gravity, for example, is a song I wrote when I was 18 years old after my, thank you. They love 18-year-olds here. But I wrote that after just like a tremendous heartbreak and feeling so alone. And I found that sharing that song was so connective because people really relate to heartbreak and feeling like they got cheated on. People really relate to that. But I think it's so, the fact that we can step in and help each other is such a miracle that I want to talk about it all the time. That I think incredible therapists are out there, incredible doctors are out there, incredible friends are out there. The truth is that there's so much fear and there is so much support. Like both of those things are true at all times. And I think that was, it's been a huge piece of learning for me in my life to continue to just, the more I can share honestly, the more I really feel like I'm doing my ministry in life, is that being honest about what's hard or vulnerable. I'm not scared to go there. I know I'm not going there alone. You just never are alone in those deepest, darkest places. We're just not. So, yeah, it's part of the fascination and the miracle of the fact that there is help that I think is part of why I want to talk about it.
I mean, I appreciate the clarity and also the courage that you have brought to these issues. And as you pointed out, Celia, the art that both of you bring so beautifully into this world has actually helped so much, I think, to help other people feel seen and heard. Gravity, I didn't mention this to you when we talked earlier, but Gravity was a song I listened to all the time when I was younger, when I was struggling with relationships. And I would put it on mix CDs that I would make for other people. See, some people still remember those things. I listened to it on the plane coming to New York today. Like, it's part of my list of songs that I love. So.
That's amazing.
Well, you're amazing. And this is maybe the last question I'll ask you, and then I'm going to put in some audience questions because people have wonderful things to ask you. I look at both of you, as I think many other people do, these two incredibly talented human beings who have accomplished so much in their fields, who are beloved by so many. And I think people probably look at you and think, gosh, you probably never question your self-worth. You probably never have moments of doubt because you've made it, right? One of my real worries as I talk to young people around the country is I feel like their sense of self-worth, what society's telling them their self-worth is that it's conditional and that it's based on their ability to get into fancy schools, get fancy jobs, become famous, make a ton of money. Now, there's nothing wrong with any of those things. But the problem is when you think your self-worth is dependent on that. And I was wondering if you had any reflections just on that journey, that universal journey we all have to find a sense of worth and to feel worthy in a world that too often tells us that we're not. How have you managed to wrestle with feelings of lack of self-worth when they arise? And do they arise for you?
That's life's work, isn't it?
Yeah, right.
Do you know the first thing that comes to my head? Towards the end of the pandemic, I did a training to become an end-of-life doula, and it really, we had to do a lot of meditations that we were supposed to put ourselves in the position of the person who was dying and to imagine the things. If we were given a terminal diagnosis with 3 months to live, they said, what are the things that you want to endure beyond when you die? What do you want your legacy to be? What do you want? How do you want to think about, how you are remembered? And being an artist was one of those things, but it really, the relationships and the things that came to my mind were so not what you're talking about in terms of how we start to value ourselves. And I think another part of the meditation was like regrets or unfinished business or the way that we wished we had spent our time differently. And I think for me, to think so clearly, and what you said, Sarah, like our time here, we don't know how much we have. And it's so easy for me to get caught up in a sort of narrative about what I hope my life will become, that when I find myself in that cycle to think like, if I don't have that much time on the planet, like how am I using my energy? Like, is that a way to get myself in alignment so that I feel less despair, less feelings of not enoughness, and that this can bring me into a kind of a realignment of how I'm living my life so that I can really hold the fact that every day is a gift. And that's like such a cliched thing to say, I think, and it's also true. Yeah. And so I think that's, at this chapter of my life, that is something that I've been returning to more and more often.
Beautiful.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, I think the self-worth thing, man, it's so heavy and it comes up so often. Again, it's like it's an opportunity for a point of connection because we're all, I think over the last few years, I had to sort of go on my own mental health journey. I got on medication in 2021 after dealing with many, many years of anxiety, depression, kind of up and down and thinking I had it under control. I wish I would have tried Lexapro because Jesus, that's so much better. There's this sense of, like, will you allow yourself to matter to you? Like, what if you take everybody else out, knowing that that's not the goal, but that can you not abandon yourself enough? I think about this a lot, about the young versions of ourselves, us as children that live in these bodies. My friend Elizabeth Zeman wrote this beautiful song called Taller Children. She's like, in the end, we're all just taller children. And isn't that so true?
So true.
But that we really just want someone to take care of us, and the person that needs to do that is you. And if you really get right with yourself, you won't find yourself feeling alone. You won't. It's showing up to be able to meet your own needs over and over again, and I think it really helps remind you that you matter to you. The waitress.
And it brings
guys.
it, I think, full circle.
You matter to you. I matter to me.
But I think this thing that you're saying is actually might be like a key to this question of like what makes the middle-age friendship so much more powerful, which is that if you are in a different kind of relationship with yourself and all of your self-doubt and all of those feelings of not enoughness, when you can bring that to another person, then the potential for like profound connection becomes so much greater because you are able to live inside of the feelings of not enoughness.
Because those aren't going anywhere. That's just going to be you'll just be in relationship with those forever.
I have so many questions for you, but I don't have enough time to ask them, so I'm going to go to our audience questions. I may have to get another conversation together with both of you because this is a lot of good wisdom coming up. Anyone in favor of that? More time? Absolutely. So we have a question here from Claire, who says, which creative work of yours, whether you knew it or not, supported you during a difficult period?
Wow, I think they all feel like they serve a purpose in some way. I wrote a book of essays called Sounds Like Me.
It's so good.
I hated it. I hated it so much. It was so hard. And please, if you read the book, it's people on my book tour were like, oh, I read your book in line. I'm like, it's really not that long, is it? It's not that deep, okay. But that piece of work, learning to love something that was difficult was so important. That you don't have to only just go towards what's easy. Because that really was a pivot point in my career. And then I worked on Waitress, and then I worked on a television show, and then I worked on another television show, and I sort of just expanded out. I'm writing another musical. Like, loving things that are difficult and complicated, I think, is a really valuable lesson. So I think writing that book was so hard, and I had to do so much sort of digging internally. But I think I learned the most about myself from it, and especially about the process of loving something that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that.
That's so good.
What about you?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about a lot recently. I'm in this play right now where Jessica Lange is playing my mother, and the year after I graduated from college, my mom died, and I was tracking the number of times I have acted with women who have both played my mother on stage and then like legitimately mothered me in life. And I was like, what other profession would you get to go into where like that massive loss at 23, that I have just been held by all of these different women, most of whom do not resemble my own mother, but like tapped in and were able, both like in this on-stage relationship and an off-stage relationship. Like, I feel like that is one of the greatest gifts of my life as an actor, is that I've had all of these like surrogate artistic mothers.
That is beautiful. Oh my gosh. And just to think that, I'm wondering, I suspect you have stepped into that kind of role in your own way for other people that you've worked with, and what a gift you're both getting and also giving.
Yeah, I think that I actually have not totally thought about it in those terms, but I think that's absolutely right. That I remember the first show that I ever did where I was the only woman in it, and I was like, what's this gonna be like? And it was like 12 men and me, and they would come into my dressing room and they would lie down on my couch and they would say, like, I'm having a hard time. And I was like, tell me everything. I was so excited to be the person that people wanted to come to and just like talk about their feelings. But yeah.
That's beautiful. I love that. Sarah asks, music is so important to my mental health, specifically the lyrics of a song. What is one of your favorite life lyrics?
I did write that, didn't I? Life lyrics?
Yeah.
Is that what?
Yeah, that's what it says. Life lyrics, or lyrics perhaps speaks to you in terms of life advice.
There's one that's coming to my mind. There's a song that I listen to all the time that is, Prince wrote the song, but an artist named Martika. Do you remember Martika, anybody?
Yeah.
She was on Kids Incorporated for a while on Disney. She had a relatively short-lived music career, but she has a song called Love Thy Will Be Done. And there's something about this song that feels like prayer to me, and I really think that love is the ultimate, everything comes back to that for me. So I think about that lyric a lot. And I thought about getting a tattoo, and then I'm like, am I gonna have a Martika song on my arm? I just like don't know how I feel about that. But I really love the lyric, that whatever it is, to surrender, capital S, to the life force of love that is moving us where we need to go, and to really relax into some faith in that. So I love that lyric. That's one that comes to mind.
Great. How about you, Celia?
Oof, it's hard. The first thing that came into my head was all you need is love. As like sort of basic, but I think I really believe that.
Huh.
Yeah, I do
That
too.
is timeless. I love that one too.
What
Well,
about
maybe-
you? Do you have one?
Oh, gosh, I don't know. I was going to get asked this question. It's actually from a poem. I would say there's a poet, Khalil Gibran, who's one of my favorite. He's a Lebanese poet, wrote a compilation of poems called The Prophet. And there's a poem on work that I used to actually, when I was teaching residents and medical students in the hospital, every Friday morning I would sit with them and we would read a different poem together. And we would talk about how the message of that poem, what did it talk about what it taught us, about how we wanted to show up in the world, how we wanted to care for patients. And this was often one of them, the poems that I would bring. And there's a line in that poem which says, work is love made visible. And I always love that because there are so many difficult moments we would have in the hospital with patients or with their families, or times when you knew what someone had in terms of their illness, but you didn't know how to help them because there's nothing that could cure them. Or maybe their families were really upset and you were trying to help them at a time of great suffering, and maybe you couldn't do everything you wanted to. And in those moments, like, I would often repeat to myself that, yeah, we don't have to have all the information, all the knowledge, all the cures, but if you can come to your work with love, then that is work that's well done, and that's how you can serve. Maybe I'll ask one more question, and then we'll close with a little surprise at the end. So this is from Dina, who's on the live stream. Thank you, Dina, and everyone who's watching from afar. She said, I'm grateful for a chance to join virtually on my birthday. Happy birthday, Dina. Happy birthday. Dina is a psychologist, and she says she loves how you all destigmatize mental health. Any tips when meditation or other self-care feels too self-indulgent with everything else that's going on in the world?
I mean, to me, it feels like it's worth exploring who's telling you it's self-indulgent, who's telling you taking care of yourself is no longer as important as something else. And I do understand that we're contextualized in a particularly fraught moment on the global stage. But I do think that that time for, I mean, maybe there's a different meditation or something. I would question the part is wanting to devalue the time that is taken for introspection and connection with yourself, because I really think that is such the should be the driver. But perhaps it's a shift in the modality. You know, meditation in a group might feel like it had more, be less self-indulgent. You might feel like you're sort of service in some kind of way, or connecting to something larger than yourself. But my therapist always asks me, when I get caught in a little thought like that, she's like, who's telling you? Who's telling you that it's not okay for you to fill in the blank? And I always think it's good because we can catch ourselves, and we're actually just adopting the voice of some critic, you know, that doesn't need to be there.
I also think so much of this work that we are trying to do to make ourselves feel more whole and more, integrated, is so that we can then be of service. That it's like, if you think of it as this loop, which is like, I meditate so that I can be a better parent to my child. I meditate so that when I walk down the street, I have a smile for someone. Like, that it's this idea that you're investing in yourself so that the cycle is then going out so that you can be a better citizen. That it's for you, but then it also is for other people. And so that I wonder if we think of it in that context too, that we are trying to make ourselves better so that we can make the world better, then it's less of it feels maybe less selfish.
Sarah, Celia, there's so much that we've touched on in this last hour. It feels so rich, and I just feel this sort of welling sense of gratitude to both of you for giving us this time and this space, and for being so open and vulnerable and so honest in talking about these issues that touch all of our lives, but which you don't often get to talk about so honestly in settings like this. I'm thinking, there's so many notes I've scribbled down here and in my head about just takeaways from this, but one thing that's coming to mind is this recognition that this deeper crisis that we seem to be living through, a crisis of loneliness, of disconnection, a crisis that feels like a deeper underlying spiritual crisis where we feel unmoored and have lost a sense of belonging. Feels like this, to me, feels like one of the most important things for us to address in society, because it's not just for our mental health and our physical health, but it's also because when we're disconnected, we're more prone to being divided and polarized. We do less well at school and the workplace. We show up differently for our communities, for our families. We all need each other. That's just a fundamental human law, if you will. And I think about the fact, something you said earlier in the conversation, Sarah, about the fact that we don't have to be doctors or nurses to help each other heal. We have, all of us, the ability to help one another heal because we have the ability to give and receive love. And that is the oldest medicine, the most powerful medicine we have. You know, yesterday I was giving the commencement address at a university that my wife and I both went to, and I was so blessed to have a very rare experience, which is to have my son and daughter, who are 7 and 6, there with me. And I remember standing on that stage at a university that I had spent so many beautiful years at, and looking at my 2 children, and at one point wondering, what kind of life are they going to live? And the thought that kept coming to my mind again and again is I want them to know that their fundamental worth is grounded in their ability to give and to receive love. That it's what they were born with. It's what all of us were born with. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we receive messages from society that tells us it's not that important or it's not that valuable. But as kids, we actually know that from the youngest of ages. And I've realized that if I can do whatever I can do as a parent to help my children hold on to that knowledge, whatever I can do to help encourage them to be present for other people, to be real with other people, to show up for other people, that's what will help ensure that they live the kind of connected, deeply fulfilled life where they not only have a sense of belonging, but help create that for other people as well. And that's what I want for all of us. So I'm so grateful for both of you making this conversation possible, for sharing just beautiful stories and so much wisdom. I want to thank also the staff of the 92nd Street Y for just giving us this one incredible place to have this conversation. Yes. I mean, what a special place this institution is, and I feel just honored that we are just one of many people who have had the chance to have conversations here.